Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Brand Together podcast. My name is Brett Ryan, your host, and I'm joined today by one of my favorite people, none other than Kyle Ahrendsen. Kyle is a director of sports marketing and partnerships at FRITO LAY. And Kyle, actually, he was one of the very first people I interviewed when I was doing research for my book, Brand Together. He's a partnership expert. His insights are deep and meaningful. He's been at this for a lot of years. And so I'm excited to have him on the show. How are you, Kyle?
Hey, I'm super excited to talk with you today. This is fun. It's been a few years since we had our first interview, and I think some things have definitely stayed the same, but hopefully I have a little bit more wisdom to share with you today as we talk. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining. And let me just say at the outset, both not just you, but also Doritos, and I would argue Frito Lay as a whole, we're so generous and trusting, right? As a first time author, I approach folks and say, hey, I'd love to interview you and talk about your brand. And of course, we had some conversations about that, but to you and to your company's credit, Mike just said, here's what I'm trying to do. And you guys said, that sounds great. Let's do it. And that was not something I experienced with every brand, right? I think successful companies, I think rightfully understand the power of brand, and there's just a non-trivial amount of trust that was afforded to me. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I remember when you first approached me about it, and I was like, hey, this sounds really cool. It sounds like a fun opportunity. Yeah, I'd love to be in a book. I'd
Yeah.
never been in one, and that sounds fun. And I remember bringing it to my manager, and I was like, hey, I'm not really sure like what I can share, what I can't share. And I remember I had to get on a call with our legal team and talk about it. And they were basically like, look, as long as it's in the past, it's been done, it's historically accurate to at least to the best of your knowledge, go for it. So that was pretty interesting to me to see like how that would all function. And yeah, it was fun. And now here we are, book published. And
Yeah. It is interesting. And like I said, I appreciate it. And frankly, the stories you shared with me were incredibly insightful. We won't dive into those stories specifically today. For those of you listening, I never plug my book on this podcast. I'm going to now just for context of the conversation. So you understand what we're talking about. Wrote a book. It's called Brand Together. And the subtitle is Six Principles of Successful Brand Partnerships. And Kyle shared a couple of stories that are just perfectly illustrate that point to discuss a partnership that he managed between Doritos and Marvel Studios in promotion of one of the Spider-Man films and what they did with some of the chip packaging in order to support that. And it's incredibly insightful. And that's what we've been talking about. But I want to talk about something a little bit different today. So Kyle, you've been at Frito Lay for a number of years and you've
yeah,
had the opportunity to manage a number of partnerships. And so, first of all, before we go any further, could you, in your own words, describe what it is you do at Frito Lay? Just quickly give our viewers an understanding of who you are, what the work is you do, how your work involves brand partnerships.
so I'll give like really quick context of a few years ago when I did the partnership with Marvel specifically. I was on the Doritos brand team doing different partnerships there. And over the last few years, I've worked in the capacity of sports partnerships. So essentially, what I do is I own the acquisition strategy for partnerships in sports across leagues and teams and athletes holistically across Frito Lay, as well as once we sign those partnerships, I work across our portfolio of brands to activate them in different sporting moments, whether that's big tentpole moments like the Super Bowl or whether that is a TV commercial, et cetera. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions here. Let's talk about Frito Lay broadly. A lot of Frito Lay's brands are quite literally household names. They're more or less solved the awareness problem,
Yeah.
right? A lot
Yeah.
of brands have an awareness problem. They're not household names. There's part of their addressable market or audience that doesn't know who they are, and they've got this awareness problem to solve. Frito Lay is a house of leading CPG brands. In many instances, they've solved this problem. So what is it exactly that Frito Lay is looking for in brand partners? When you think about sports brands that you could partner, what is it that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think ultimately it depends on the partnership, obviously. I'll talk about sports for just a second here. I think for sports, for us, it's really about the sales unlock, incremental opportunity. Just as you mentioned, if you could find a person that doesn't know what Doritos are, like I would be shocked. I mean, other than, I don't know, a small child maybe who doesn't, who hasn't experienced it or experienced it for the first time. But outside of that, yeah, it's really not an awareness build. It's how do we attach ourselves to such a prominent brand and a partner? When you think about a team specifically, there's so much brand love for teams and athletes. And if you were to take the NFL, for instance, it's all conglomerated into 32 teams. It's one league. It's not fragmented. Some other sports might be, or if you think about like esports specifically, there's so many different ways in that a brand can think about partnering in esports. There's games, consoles, streamers, like a multiplicity of different things. Within professional leagues, it's one league, it's 32 teams. So as long as you have that league or you have team affinity, there's tons of brand love for that team within those regions. So what it helps us to do is we can get incremental perimeter within each of those individual regions where we have the team marks just by slapping their IP and their marks and their logos on our materials, whether that's packaging or whether that's point of sale materials or promotional or TV creative. And people gravitate towards that because they have so much brand love for those teams. So it's really about like partnership of, hey, here's two of your favorite things, your favorite snack and your favorite team coming together. And when we can just say that you can buy any snack, but we're the official snack of your favorite team, what's more compelling than that than
Yeah.
to purchase us where they partner with us, they trust us, we trust them, you should trust us too. So from a sports perspective, it's really that unlock. I would
It's
say for other CPGs or even food CPGs, it could be tapping into flavor or form. It's innovation, right? What are their core competencies that we can tap into that we could potentially utilize? So it really depends on who we're talking about, like who we're partnering with.
Thank you for that. It's interesting to me because when you were discussing your answer, you were talking about the difference between, for example, esports and traditional sports. And it almost reflects the difference between traditional media and new media, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you think about, I have this conversation with my nieces and nephews all the time where I'm old now. Us millennials, we're old, and I don't know who the latest SoundCloud rappers are. And something I share with them is I don't know who the biggest artists are now today, but I know they'll never be as culturally relevant as the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
And like the reason is because the Beatles were big at a time where everyone was listening to national radio, watching national television. Whereas now it's so fragmented and they're streaming and there's the internet and consumers control so much of their consumption of media. And it's almost like these national sports leagues, they're some of the only holdouts of kind of that old way of like
Yeah.
everyone's watching the same 32 teams, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you can watch it on the internet, a couple other places, but
Mm.
everyone's watching the same game, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like this consolidation of consumer attention, and that creates these really powerful sports brands.
Yeah.
And Doritos, for example, or Frito Lay, it's possibly one of the only places these powerful sports brands can look to consistently partner with a brand that's bigger than themselves, right?
Yeah.
We
It's true.
partner. If I'm the GM or if I'm the brand manager at a sports team, yeah, I could partner with some new crypto company or whatever, right? Just hypothesize with some new emerging company. Or I could partner with a brand that has 99% consumer awareness, right? It's just,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, to your point, it's a huge leveraging position for us where we can say, look, when we put you on our packaging or when we use your marks, that's essentially free media dollars for you, right? Media in a different sense, right? It's in-store media, I guess you could say. It's live at the point of purchase for us. And there's other instances of that. And they're choosing to engage with our brand, right? Like you are choosing to purchase when you pick up a bag, you are choosing our brand and their IP is on our bag or on that piece of POS or whatever. And every time they get it out of the pantry, they have an opportunity to see that branding again. So when and I sell that, right? When I talk to potential brand partners, I don't only talk about, hey, here's what's in it for us, and this is why we like you guys. It's here's the value that we're going to bring to you if you choose to go with us as opposed to any other partner.
which I think is fantastic. This idea of making it very clear to, I think that's part of what makes the brands under Frito Lay such an attractive proposition to these partners because it's here's what we offer, right? And the last time we talked about, hey, we could put your sports team on 100 million tiny little billboards
Yeah.
in convenience stores, grocers throughout the world. And just being able to help them clearly understand that offer. And also the fact you can't ignore it. Everyone's been to the grocery store. They've seen
Yep.
it, right?
Yeah.
And Frito Lay, they're masters at those marketing channels, right? You don't go to those places and not see those brands, right?
Yeah. And you know what is really interesting that over the last few years, I've looked at how do other brands partner in sports? And one of the biggest questions that everyone has is ROI, right? Like how do you turn investment on these sports partnerships because oftentimes they're incredibly expensive because they know how incredibly powerful their team is or their brand is, right? And how much brand love and affinity people have around these sports teams or an athlete or whatever, or a league, right? Like the NFL. And we think about that process really differently than I think many brands might think about that. There was this study that we looked into when we were looking at in stadium presence of branding within a stadium. And there was this group that went to, I can't remember how many events they went to, but went to a certain number of events and they counted the number of instances of how many branding opportunities they saw within the stadium. And on average, between different stadiums across the US over the time period of the entirety of the game, they were exposed to, on average, 20,000 different instances of
Oh,
branding. So we did a follow up study to that original study, and we asked consumers how many brands within a week after they have left the stadium, how many brands do they remember seeing at the stadium? And they responded that it was 2 to 3 brands within a week.
wow.
After a month, it whittled down to 1.
Yeah.
1 brand that they remember associated with that sporting event they went to. So and I'm not saying there's 20,000 brands within the stadium. I'm saying there's 20,000 instances of different branding, media opportunities, whatever that is. That was really eye-opening to us to say, okay, we need to be thinking about sports partnerships in a different way. And I understand that implicitly with a lot of these things, with a lot of brands and how they're partnering in sports, they're thinking about awareness and they're thinking about maybe there's a target consumer they're going after, or they want that brand perception to increase. But ultimately, if they're not conscious of your brand within there because there's so much noise going on, are you really breaking through? Like how much of those impressions are actually valuable, right? And so when we went back and we thought about this, we said, okay, what is the true impact that we can make with a sports partnership? And for us, it was directly attributed to sales. And so
Sure.
we always tried to link everything back to opportunities for sales. When we think about a team partnership, I'm not really doing that much within a stadium unless I think it's really truly breakthrough that I can capture consumers' attention. We can unpack that of we built a little bit of a formula of what we think that is, of how we can get to that
Yep.
and successful brand partnerships that I've seen in stadiums. But ultimately, I strip them down to give me the opportunities for valuable experiences that I can send consumers to
Yep.
or a customer to host them there and to be able to unlock like incremental activity within their store because they see the value of the branded partnership after they've come to a game or we've hosted them or whatever it is. So ultimately that helps in one, I'm driving the cost of the partnership down significantly because I'm not overpaying for, frankly, I don't want to say it's overpriced media, but it's the par for media within stadiums is much, much more expensive than what you could get otherwise. Like it's
Yep.
much more efficient elsewhere.
Yep.
You're paying a premium. And so I strip it down and say, I don't think that's truly where our value will drive. And the other thing, to your point earlier, is the fact that our brands, we are not trying to drive awareness. And so, really, all I would be doing is trying to improve maybe like purchase likelihood or brand perception, which
Yep.
that would probably vary depending on the brand of like how much I would need to do that. And you'd have to make a significant investment, significant enough that are you one of those two or three brands that
Yep.
people are remembering? Are you the one after a month? That's got to be impactful, right? So, anyways, going on a little bit of a
Yeah.
tangent.
No,
Hopefully,
no.
it's helpful to see. Like, I think we think about that a little bit differently just because of VR.
Yeah, no, because the awareness problem is solved. It's like the non-digital media equivalent of we don't care about impressions. We care about clicks, right?
Yep,
You know what I mean? It's not,
right.
don't
Yep,
think about it too much. It breaks down, but that's essentially what you're saying. And when you're paying for impressions on a digital platform or a social platform, man, those platforms, they make their butter there, right? Where it's
yeah,
like they can make a lot of money. Yeah, we showed it to everyone. But then on the other side of that, you see what actually filters through to purchases or conversions is oftentimes an order of magnitude smaller. And so once again, here's a scenario or another great example of brand has solved the awareness problem. Therefore, we're in a very powerful position to negotiate advantageously for a brand that hasn't solved the awareness problem. The sports team comes out or a
yeah,
stadium comes to you and says, wow, look at how many people we can put you in front of. And you guys can say, we don't care.
yeah,
We're everywhere. We've solved
yep,
that problem.
yeah.
No, I think
Exactly
that's
right.
great. Here's a question that I'm really curious to hear your take on. I think an important idea to talk about in brand partnerships, there's this idea of like non-visual elements of brand, right?
Yeah,
So a lot of folks, particularly your lay people, your non-marketing professionals, they'll think, oh, branding is logos and typography and colors and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know that brands are much more than that. So for example, Doritos, for example, there are non-visual elements of that brand. What do we want consumers to think about when they think Doritos? And then there's this mental mapping of non-visual ideas that we hope to summon to the forefront of the consumer's mind. And so sports brands have these non-visual elements as well. Sometimes they're called the hedonic elements of the brand, right? And so what is it about the non-visual elements of sports brands that make them compelling partner candidates for the brands that you work on at FRITO LAY?
yeah. That's a really good question. One of the things that I would say is that sports brands in particular, we talk about this sometimes when we go through our insights every year and we do retesting with consumers. It's a club, right? Essentially, what sports teams and brands are able to do is take complete strangers and make them almost instantaneous friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that the power to be able to do that is there are very few things. And I would say branding is one of them. There are certain brands that people gravitate towards, like it's a part of their identity
Mhm.
that when they find that common connection with others, that same power can be unlocked. But it is most prevalent within sports where you have this camaraderie and strangers becoming part of the same identity and group, whether that's in that setting or otherwise, once they find out that they're a fan of the same team. And so the opportunity for us to say, hey, guess what? This is your favorite team and this person's favorite team. And this is our brand's favorite team as well, even in for the Dallas Cowboys, presumably America's team. That's a lot of what they say and a lot of their marketing. How do we market to Cowboys fans? We say that Frito Lay or Doritos or Tostitos is America's choice of chip. And we put the branding next to Dallas Cowboys brand. And so now when you see that, whether it's conscious or subconscious for consumers, our full intent is that the next time you think of your favorite team or you sit down to watch a game in that occasion, that experience can be enhanced if you're then using the official snack of
Mhm,
that, right?
mhm.
I would say that is one of the most powerful non-visual brand elements. The other things, and I'm not sure that this fully answers your question, but there's all of these other non-branded assets that sports provide to us that are extremely valuable, like concessions opportunities
Sure.
within the arena. There are hospitality opportunities that we can utilize with customers, sampling with a huge, large conglomerate of people in a captive audience, right? Where we can essentially bring sampling right to them and incite within their minds, hey, guess what? As you're watching this game, it's going to be better if you've got a snack in your hand as well.
Yep,
So,
yep.
anyways, I think that there's a multiplicity of assets outside of branding opportunities that they can provide for brands. And particularly for us, those are some of the strongest ones.
Yeah, I love that. And no, I think you perfectly answered the question. It's crazy to me how much, I don't know if this exactly appropriate terms to describe it, but I hate the word synergies, right? But there's all this less tangible, but very meaningful overlap of the consumer experience you're creating. To your point about concessions opportunities, right? It's like people gather to watch a sporting event. What else do people do
Yeah.
when they gather? They eat, right?
Yeah.
And have your brand right there,
Great point. Yeah.
your food brand, right? I also love the point you made about it's a club, right? There are precious few products and brands that can execute on that. So maybe like your motor vehicles, right?
Yep.
Harley Davidson is a great
I
example,
think
right? It's like
exact one I was thinking of.
if
Yep.
you own a bike, you're in the club, right?
Yep.
And say what you will about the trajectory of Harley's larger business, they've got a durable brand at the
Yep.
and it's an institution, right? And then there's similar motorcycle brands that have similar properties, but oh, what a fantastic insight.
Another thing that I just thought of as you were talking about that is first party data, which when you're talking about targeting and you are talking about like personalized messaging, localizing at scale, that's another thing that this allows us to do. When you think about the 32 teams, you basically have, you know, more or less 32, let's say, of the biggest markets throughout the US where you can create localized, personalized messaging using first party data from each of the teams. And I know we're talking about the NFL a lot, but that holds true across a lot of different sports leagues and teams where you can tap into some of those assets and utilize them to be more targeted around your messaging and say, hey, you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, but you live in Seattle. Guess what? We've got Dallas Cowboys Tostitos bags that we can send straight to your home.
Like,
And you can have your Dallas Cowboys fandom right there at home and have your, party pack there. You don't have to be in Dallas.
I didn't even think of that. That you're blowing my mind right now. First party data is powerful. And here you have, it's like someone's being a fan of a particular team. It's like this really powerful psychographic data,
Yeah.
right? It's not demographic data. It's
Right.
a consumer saying, I have an explicit preference.
Yep.
Wow, that's fascinating. And then, yeah, I can see how you guys can do some really powerful stuff with. I want to unpack that a little bit more.